I'm going to be typing on this and then sending it out to you. This is one of the things that we do in the post conference. So this, what I'm talking about, is called an action plan. So the action plan is something that's gonna follow you. It's right here. But it's okay for us to talk about it, and you'll still upload it. The idea with the action plan is kind of like, it's a living document that goes with you to Field Studies 2, Field Studies 3, and then into your internship here. And it's based on the idea of pointing out or coming up with a couple of the key teaching skills that you're going to kind of focus on to improve upon. So what we do is we think about the things that you feel like you're really strong in, and we're not going to necessarily work on getting better on those. But we're also not going to think about the things that you feel like you just struggle with the very, very worst. We can choose those things, but that's not the goal of this. It's to think about things that maybe you're not your strongest in, but you feel are really important towards your kind of style of teaching. So if we're going to think about this, and one thing that's really good to do this after you've had a chance to actually teach a lesson, right? Because sometimes it's harder to think about, oh, well, what would I be good at? But after you had the opportunity to stand in front of people, create a lesson, see how well they got the lesson or didn't, you can have a better handle on, okay, well, these are things I think I'm really good at, but what do I need to get better at? So that's what we're gonna really talk about today. So when we think about the things we're talking about, I'm gonna show this to you. And I'm gonna fill out 2 of these, so I'll be toggling back and forth. But it's all of these things. And we're gonna choose 2, okay? It's impractical to try to, I mean, if you were an intern, we might be choosing 3, right? It's impractical really to try to think about doing more than that. So classroom management strategies, that'll be something I think you can do later. It's difficult to think about that right now because of the situation that you were in. Provide high quality academic feedback. I mean, that's okay, but sometimes we also think about that as far as like the follow-up of feedback. So I don't know 100% how appropriate that is to think about that in the scenario that you taught the lesson. Provide rigor through accurate and high quality content. Okay, so that's when we can think about that kind of designing of your lesson. Positively impact student learning. Like, what did you do so that the students learned the lesson? Formative assessment, right, during instruction. Higher level questions. Can you see that? Strong subject and content knowledge. Knowing what you're teaching. Multi-sensory instruction. Assessment to measure learning gains. That's not really one that is appropriate for this. Yeah, some of these others are, but differentiated instruction. It's a little hard.
I wouldn't say for now because like we didn't have like students to differentiate for.
Exactly. Foster student engagement, scaffolding instruction, and integrate literacy instruction. So when you think about this list, off the top of your head, what do you feel like is some of your stronger? Like just 1 or 2 of the things that you're like, yeah, I think I did pretty good in that lesson. And I also think that in general, that's something that I'm kind of stronger in as a teacher.
I mean,
Well, what's gonna make you a good teacher? What are these things kind of here? Do you feel like, yeah, I may not be the best, but I'm pretty good at that?
I'd say like high level questioning, which I think that kind of goes with is one thing for formative assessment, or can.
No, we do not use hierarchical questions for assessment.
Can't you kind of use it though? Like
You can, but you okay, so higher order questions are presenting questions to students so they can grapple with the information to actually learn the content more. It's not even that they should actually know the answer. There necessarily shouldn't even be a right or wrong answer to higher order thinking. Whereas when you're formatively assessing, you're gonna typically ask a lot of times maybe a little bit lower order questions, because that is gonna be where then you're gonna say, you're gonna determine how you're gonna move the instruction. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
So are you taking it in when you're asking higher order questions? Yeah, you're kind of, you're processing that as a teacher. But depending on how your students answer the true higher order questions, you may not change your instruction.
Right.
You may just be like, because formative assessment is to form further instruction. It may be some sort of assessment, just kind of see where they are, but I mean, I don't know, that's a fuzzy line there. And if I say yes to you, I feel like it's a cop-out, and I feel like you're not gonna continue to separate those two ideas in your head. And I wanna make sure that you do. You know, I wanna present challenging questions to you to make you think, but I also need to sometimes ask a few little questions just to kind of see where you are, which are gonna typically, like I said, be more on the understanding level. Okay. But higher order questions, yeah, so you could even say, I'm good at both of those. I'm good at kind of formatively assessing where they are, but I'm also good at kind of throwing in those higher order questions to make somebody think. You know?
I'd say integrate literacy instruction too.
Yeah, you're taking a lot of literacy classes, so that's something that you have 6 total that you'll be taking. Okay, what do you think of for you, Paula? What do you?
I can really think of my strengths. I think more of my weaknesses.
No, I want you to know what your strengths.
But I don't know, because if it was like a real lesson to kids, I would be more thinking about my strengths, but it was not really like to kids. So I could not think of a strength in that sense.
Like, do you feel like if you were teaching the class, like you'd be able to kind of manage like attention wise
I would struggle with that.
with keeping their like attention
Yeah.
and focus on task?
The scaffolding instruction is like to help them. I'm good at that. I'm really, like, I have a lot of empathy, and sometimes when I was a kid and I struggled, I always wanted that help from the teacher, and I think that I'm really good at that.
And kind of breaking it down in kind of little
Yeah.
pieces, and I can see that, as a student, from your aspect, even as a student, because you're good at asking questions for yourself. And so that kind of translates over into like when the student is struggling, even identifying, well, what are they struggling with? So even like today, when you were asking questions, you weren't just sitting there struggling, like you knew what questions to ask. So that presents itself in the same aspect, like if you were teaching that lesson and you saw a kid struggling who may not know what questions to ask, you would kind of be able to see what are those little pieces and I'm gonna start feeding them. And maybe it's vocabulary. Maybe it, is, so I could definitely see where that scaffolding. What about, would be more like stronger suit? What about engaging the students? I think your lesson was engaging.
Like kind of like what they did today, they did a Kahoot, and they did another activity, like keeping students engaged in what they're learning, which is like kind of like multi-sensory instruction, like not just worksheet, like watch a video, discuss about it with your partner, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, because based on the idea, like if someone were to walk into your room and watch you teaching, a good sign of a teacher is to be watching the students, not to be watching the teacher. Okay, the teacher, what are they doing? That's great, but what are the students doing? And that's a good like kind of finger on the pulse of like student engagement. Getting students doing stuff, answering questions, talking to their partner, actively involved in you actually doing things. So, okay, so I think those are some solid positives. So if you were to say to someone something off that list, it is just like, not necessarily that we're gonna work on, but if you're like, yeah, I know I don't do very good at that, that's really, really, really hard for me, I know I'm gonna struggle with it, because that may be something that you work on a little further into your, progress of getting your degree. It's not necessarily that, you're gonna put up the biggest hurdle right off the way, So what do you see as your like biggest? Or potentially?
Maybe for me, like, the fact of just talking English is hard for me, so maybe ask higher level questions is hard for me to like, because sometimes when I was in school with the kids, I was like explaining and talking and they couldn't understand my accent. So it was like I was talking to the walls because no one understood me. So I just decided to shut down and don't talk.
Right, as a teacher, we get that way too, we're
Yeah.
people, we can like get embarrassed or like frustrated.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, in your native language, do you think you would have that same?
No problem.
Right. You think that that would be, because I think that's something that you need to continue to be part of your growth process, even when you go to Texas, it's Texas, yeah. Even when you go to Texas and you're constantly in, classrooms, but in your mind's eye, always keep yourself in that Spanish classroom too. Because it is gonna be a transition for you, right? And that's fair. So whereas you might say, yeah, walking to an English classroom, I might have higher, because you're thinking everything already twice, right? You're translating as you're thinking. Yeah, so it's maybe a little bit harder to move into that. So I would see that. But if you're sitting here telling me that you don't think that that would be an issue in the Spanish classroom, then and that's where you want to teach.
Yeah.
What do you think would be then, just pick one more, without the language barrier?
You were talking about classroom management. You sound like you weren't a fan of that.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's another one.
Yeah, classroom management. So, and that's one of those art of teaching. So like in foundations too, I'm trying to teach you the science of it. What do we think about when we think of classroom management? Making sure before we talk, we get everybody's attention. Making sure we're designing lessons so there's a nice momentum. It's not too fast, it's not too slow. Making sure we're using our space adequately to help, our students move around, people sitting with each other, right? Making sure that we've got the routines and we practice. Make sure we know our disciplines, right? So those are, but to your point, until you're out there in the room practicing them, you know what to do, but it's actually getting out there and doing it that's scary. So yeah, that's definitely something you could say, okay, I'm not gonna worry about that yet. Maybe as I get into my junior year of interning, I'm gonna focus a little bit more on classroom management. And sometimes it's even hard to do that even in internships. I'm just gonna be honest with you, depending on your cooperating teacher. Because sometimes you can go into an intern situation where your cooperating teacher is really just gonna let you do, and great, and you can practice more of it. But a lot of times you walk in and the cooperating teacher really kind of has their classroom management set out anyway, so you're really just following through with their stuff. It's still good practice, and it's kind of like scaffolding in a sense, because you're taking someone else's program and implementing it. Okay, you're practicing it, but then it's a whole nother ballgame when you go in for your own classroom too. But you get good ideas, and you also sometimes learn what not to do. So I could say, yeah, that's a lot of people, classroom management, it's tough. We're not gonna put that on your action plan. That would need to be something that as you get closer to internship, that you focus a little more on. Okay, what about for you? What do you think is your, that one thing that,
Like when I had, 3370, course number, but, the teacher that I worked with, even when I would attempt to use astrology, she would step in immediately, so it didn't even give me a chance to practice. So I
classroom
know.
management?
Yeah, I know what to do, but I didn't get that practice.
Yeah.
The one thing that I was thinking about the most was assessment to measure learning gains. I come up with all these great ideas, but I rarely ever get to use them.
Yeah.
So the lesson plans that we've made, we don't always implement them. So I'm just curious to see if what I'm doing or picking is accurate enough to.
I'm not gonna put you on the spot. But if you could, can you think of one off the top of your head that you're?
I did, the one class that I was talking about that she would step in, I did, I think a writing lesson or like vocabulary or something, vocabulary and writing I think is what it was for teaching language arts too.
Is this over in Roberts?
And I think it went well. I mean, I started out like with a video and like talking to them about it, like what verbs are. Oh, it was action words. That's what my standard was.
Okay.
And at the end, I had them, because it was like around Christmas time, so I had them write a story about Christmas using action words. But the problem was like, a lot of them couldn't like write a full sentence because they're a little behind.
What grade was it?
Third grade. So I kind of had to like sit there and like work with them with just even like writing or like putting their ideas on a piece of paper. Like there was one ELL student, he which I didn't agree with what the teacher was doing, but she told me to go sit with him and let him tell me what he wanted to say. And he would like tell me in Spanish sometimes because I'm trying to translate, but she told me to write it for him. That's what she does for him. She writes his stuff when he gets, you know, like a block.
Right.
Which I don't think you should do that because he needs to learn to write and to practice.
So what would be a scaffolding that you could provide for that child?
I mean, I gave all of them like sentence starters, like before they started writing, but I could probably like do the same for him, like in a chronological order type of situation with like sentence starters, or what are they called? Close something techniques that's like a paragraph with a fill in the blanks.
Oh, right. Yeah, I've heard of those. I don't big words.
I think it's close with a Z or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, so that would be something with blanks, like a word bank, especially like, you know, it wouldn't have to be a whole bunch, it could be a page with like even like 50 words that, you know, that are contained with like native word and then the English word, which even I'm thinking a word bank even for some of those students that don't write complete sentences well would have helped, if they could read them.
I almost even thought, because there was a couple kids that were like, they could have been 5th grade with the way they were writing, like above grade level, but like it was only like 2 or 3 of them, but the majority of like 10 or 12 kids like struggled the way he did. So I mean, that was like my first time teaching a lesson. So like on top of already I was being nervous because she wouldn't let me like step in and like gain their attention. So I was already like, I don't know, I kept like holding it all in because I'm like, okay, she's not even letting me like take control or try to even like implement my own strategies. But
So it was awkward just being in someone else's.
yeah,
It is. I mean, that's normal. Who, do you mind me asking?
Schroeder, I don't know how to say it.
Because some of those teachers over there too are really new.
I don't remember if she's new or not. I think she might have been one of the teachers that's been there for a couple years already.
I don't remember that name. Like if you'd said a couple other names, no, they've been there a while. They've worked with our students here.
No,
I don't
yeah,
remember that
I
one.
don't think she's
Unless she
like,
got married.
I don't think she's like a first year teacher. I think maybe like 2 or 3 years, which is still pretty new, but.
Yeah, and two, if they haven't worked with our students as much, which there was that gap with COVID where they weren't going over there, to realize how to let our students come in and work with them. And that's a really good class for you to keep in mind as you think about designing lesson plans under like the Universal Design for Learning strategy, where in that situation, I would almost think of every single student in there and implement things into my lesson plan to help all of them, realizing that there's the couple, like more of the gifted, right? Making sure, okay, you're still gonna offer the same strategies to the other, but then you might have them, do something, different as well. And, the first inclination is we might think is, oh, well, everybody else needs to write a paragraph with like 6 sentences, so we're gonna have them write 10. And that's not a really good strategy. What I would say is, like for the more gifted, either do something like create a separate word bank of like higher vocabulary words that say, okay, out of these 10, you guys gotta figure out in your writing, you gotta use at least 4 of them, right? To get them, or something like, okay, your Christmas story needs to be something that involves another culture.
Okay.
You know, like, so still you could like, take those kids that we're just doing, we wanna make them think more, right? We don't make it easy for them. So, but we don't wanna make them do more. So challenge them in kind of a new way, but then you go ahead of time and think, okay, most of my students are in here, can't just start writing, so how am I gonna approach this lesson? You know, and build that in ahead of time, like the close thing you were talking about, or like even like sentence starters, like 3 sentence starters, or just.
Yeah, cause
I'll teach them that.
yeah, cause we didn't even like really get to spend time with the whole class, because for those 2 classes, it's the like one case student study. So like we would go into a separate room and I would work with him, and then when we were done with the hour that we were supposed to be there, we left.
Okay.
So I never like got to know all the kids in a sense of like how
But
they
you still
learned
taught a
us.
lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was that very, disheartening for you, that experience?
No,
you
I
feel-
just didn't like that she wouldn't let me step in